A great friend of the imagination is travel. Travel is another way, a more gentle way, to break down cultural conditioning. I mean, what we call culture shock is when you go to Afghanistan or Albania and you realize that your expectations of how a table should be set, what a toilet looks like, how a bus ticket works, and how a telephone is supposed to operate were just so narrowly defined that now you're confronted with a telephone and a toilet and you don't even know which end is which. And it's not for nothing that the vocabulary of psychedelic experience has borrowed from the vocabulary of travel. So we take a trip, we have a journey, we go to an alien landscape. And then finally, the great friend of the imagination is the future, because it's in the future that we place our hopes, our fears, our suppositions. I mean, the future is a land of things imagined, things that have not yet undergone the formality of actually occurring. Yeah. As a friend of the imagination? Well, did I not mention last night that the two great motivators were food fantasies and sex fantasies? And yes, the sexual imagination is at a very early, I almost said primitive, but I don't mean that, but I mean early level, because if I'm understanding you correctly, it revolves around the if operator. If I approach the desirable female with the proper blandishments, and then, of course, just sexual fantasy. Then we will do this, then we will do that, and so forth and so on. It certainly is a vehicle for altered states, whether I would call them imagination or not. I suppose I would. But now that I'm thinking about your question, I think, there are pitfalls in the imagination. And probably the sexual pitfall is sentimentality. Well, tastelessness is in there too. Sentimentality is a virulent form of tastelessness. And sentimentality is very hard to root out. You may think you're a hard cookie, but I'll bet there are areas of sentimental delusion so broad and deep in every one of us. And some people carry that to the grave. They're the lucky ones. The rest of us have divorces, bankruptcies, muggings, and what have you, and slowly our sentimentality is pounded out of us. And, it's a good thing to lose sentimentality because it's a false aesthetic. And I think we recognize it. It's also a very easily manipulated. It is truly a false aesthetic in the hands of modern media because it is a great ploy for buying. If you can induce sentimentality in people, they will buy the object of that induction. Yeah. Well, your word idealism is good here because it brings me to something I always eventually get to, which is in line with this thought: culture is not your friend. Ideology is not your friend. And ideology, some people think what we're trying to do here is sort out good ideologies from bad. Should I be a Marxist? Should I be a deconstructionist? And the answer is no, none of the above. All ideologies are viral infections of some sort, mimetic infections that erode your functionability and your comfort with yourself. Ideologies set up polarities that are based on discontent. And ideologies are always, always, always based on false premises. Name an ideology and I'll tell you the false premises that it's based on. So part of this process of cultural maturity that I've been talking about is to get beyond ideology without embracing cynicism. It's not a fuck you thing. It's a deeply saddening awareness that we are not yet angel enough, that we should take ourselves that seriously. Yeah. Yes, I would say sentimentality is the feeling of attachment we have to our ideologies. So, for instance, someone says, well, Marxism, maybe we didn't have the right answer, but we certainly had a sense of a mission and a wonderful, we knew who we were, and, well, that's crazy talk. If it was wrong, it was wrong. I mean, it's like old Nazis sitting around and saying, the great old days, what was so great about the old days? You want community? Join a bowling league, for crying out loud. Yeah. No, that's a lesser evil. That's nostalgia. Another impulse for marketing frenzy. Yeah. But romanticism, I think, is a legitimate impulse and well situated in historical context and so forth and so on. Sentimentality can break out anywhere, anytime, and is, can find anything for its object. Sentimentality is a lazy form of thinking, I think. People don't want to think the hard thoughts. And yet I find the hard thoughts very paradoxically liberating. For instance, here is a hard thought. I don't want anybody to burst into tears on me, so gird your loins. But, I've spent a lifetime taking drugs, knocking around the world, having affairs, being married, being unmarried, this, that, and the other. If somebody asked me, so what do you know? What have you learned? I would have to say what I've learned is that nothing lasts. There's a hard thought. Is that a cause for joy or despair? Well, if you're thinking about everything you loved and how it's going to turn into mush as you're shoveled into the grave, it's a hard thought. But on the other hand, if you think of all the jerks who've oppressed you, it's a great consolation to know that they too will go down into that good night. Nothing lasts. That is not a cause for joy or despair. It's a cause for expanding one's feeling in the moment. If nothing lasts, then there's a conclusion, not a feeling, to be drawn from that observation. The conclusion to be drawn from it is then the felt presence of the immediate moment must be what life is for. And somebody who could take that perception and use it that way could immediately transcend all kinds of neurotic behavior, longings, regrets, doubts, fears. No, you just say no, the felt presence of immediate experience. Yeah, sentimentalism. Yeah. Well, first of all, let me comment on the Buddhist thing. I'm not that friendly to that formulation because it still is postponing gratification. It's saying death is the bouquet of life. You should live toward death. I would say the bouquet of life is this moment. But to the more important point of longevity, I certainly am not interested in living forever, whatever that might mean, because I suspect if you live forever, you miss the point. In other words, I think you miss the bouquet. On the other hand, I don't see anything wrong with, well, no, that's too much to say. The only problem I have with living past whatever, 70 is you do get into political issues of are people buying time at the expense of somebody else. One of the weirdest things about this culture is we've invented a sin for which there is no name. It's so beyond most people's ability to conceive. And this sin that we've invented is we steal the future from our children. You know, we do it with our medical health care plans where we know that all this fine surgery and stuff that you're getting is at the expense of the next generation of people. We overuse resources, leaving nothing for future generations. I don't know how that would all be sorted out. I am attracted by the idea of living as long as I want to live. I wonder how long that would be. And of course, if you make people comfortable, probably they would like to live a lot longer. What reason is there for a person to check out of a comfortable situation? In a sense, what nature does is make the body a less and less comfortable place to be until finally you just say, all right already, you know. Beam me up, Scotty. But then, you know, the other possibility is, what if there were forms of existence that were dematerialized? How would we feel about going into circuitry for a few rounds of eternity? And what are the moral implications of that? I don't know. I've had this argument with Robert Anton Wilson. He's a big enthusiast for life extension. It depends on what you think death is. And I've managed to talk myself into the idea that death is probably not simply dissolution and chaos, not because I have received any guidance from on high, but just as I observe nature, she has a wonderful parsimoniousness about her behavior. And clearly this form, which is basically an unraveled DNA molecule that is now making a lot of claims on resources in the environment in order to keep this body going, nature put a lot of effort into this. And I think that the best model for what life is, based not on religious thinking, but on biological thinking, is life is what you get when a hyperdimensional object protrudes into ordinary space. In other words, if we take this cup and cut it in two, it doesn't change. It just becomes a cup in two pieces. But it doesn't bleed, it doesn't rot, it doesn't lose its essence. If we take any living being, from a bacterium to a brontosaur, and cut it in two, the entire system falls apart very quickly, and we've created a mess, and we see that the thing that we had is no longer there. So I think what biology is the intrusion into three-dimensional space and time of hyperdimensional objects. And the other clue to that seems an argument for it, is that we do have this thing called a mind, but we can't find it anywhere. It doesn't seem to be anywhere. Even when you get down to the level of electrodes in the brain and saying words to people and watching oscilloscopes, you still can't seem to quite nail it down. So I think probably these objects retract back into hyperspace, higher space, and that this is what the soul is. The soul is there is something to this idea of a morphogenetic field, and we clothe ourselves in matter, but we are not matter. And so to actually complete a human cycle of existence, you have to go into death. It's where you came from, in some sense. I mean, we put a lot of attention into death. We don't look very much at birth. We think we understand it. I mean, we all know the story about the sperm and the egg and all that. But before that, what is going on? You know, whence cometh these forms? We seem to have the matter down pretty good. But really what a being is the intrusion into space-time of a form. And the form is unique, and then it retreats. I think it would be one of the great jokes of human history if here at the end of the 20th century, at the end of the millennium, with all this techno hypola surging around us, if we were to actually gain insight into the after-death state. And one of the reasons I'm so keen for DMT is because when I have given it to people who were purported experts in the after-death state, Tibetan lamas and shamans and this sort of thing, they come back and they say, yep, that's the territory, all right. And so in my highest states, I have had the insight, which I will convey to you without saying it's true, that this is the most limited form of existence you will ever know. You can't be deader than this. This is the bottom line. And so the good news is it's only up from here. But of course, you have to bet the farm on this cheerful rap, and there's no whining if you're wrong. This is an all or nothing bet, and so naturally it brings your heart into your throat. But that's the kind of enterprise life is. All risk and the race to the swift, I think. One last. Well, I don't know. And I wonder what I will think as I approach the great divide. It's easy in the pink of health to speculate and play the philosophe and all that nonsense. But, you know, the last dance you dance alone, and nobody will be watching. But I have seen people die, and it is an inspiration. I hope to have that equanimity of mind. The other thing about death that needs to be said is we all imagine, I think, that we will have a leisurely philosophical death. That's what we all want, you know. Months to get used to the idea, to say goodbye, to gather friends, to make our bequeathments, to speak our final wisdom, and, you know. But death for most people comes messily and unexpectedly. And so I don't think you should live in an anticipation of the drama of your deathbed scene. Better to repair to the moment. You know, being a realist primarily, what I find always waiting when I return from these flights of philosophical fancy and imagination is my body, my history, my space, my time, and these things are all good. It's a great space, a great time, a great body, a great being to be. So the real message of the psychedelic experience and of the anti-historical thrust of the critique we've been carrying out here, is to take the moment, the felt presence of immediate experience. This is all you know, it's all you will ever know. Everything else comes as unconfirmed rumor, innuendo, unrealized possibility, fading memory, conjecture, lie, hope, who knows. But in the moment of being, we have the completion of being. It is always complete, every moment. And to the degree that we force ourselves to look beyond it or cannot find ourselves within it, we betray it. And then we have more work to do.